Look, if you've been following this tour at all this season, you already know Alex Eala is the most interesting story in women's tennis right now. And what's unfolding at the Miami Open this week has taken that conversation to a completely different level. Billie Jean King did not stay silent. The moment you understand why her name is attached to what's happening here, you're going to see this whole situation completely differently. Here's where things stand as of today, March 19, 2026. Eala walked into Miami as the number 31 seed, world number 29, confirmed on center court against Laura Siegemund, a 38-year-old veteran who has been on tour since 2010. The WTA handed her the biggest stage at one of the biggest events of the year, and tournament director James Blake said it himself on Tennis Channel. Eala needs center court because she fills seats. That was the reasoning. Not rankings, seats. So now you've got a 20-year-old who was ranked 140th just 12 months, ago getting chosen to dominate the main show court, with the WTA actively glorifying that decision in front of the entire tennis world. And the woman who spent her entire life making sure women's tennis had real standards, Billie Jean King, her name is suddenly the one erupting through every headline attached to this story. You think that's an accident? If this channel gives you a different lens on tennis, subscribe right now. You'll want to be here for this one. To understand what's really happening, you need to know what Eala did to get here. March 20th, 2025. That's the date everything changed. Eala walked onto the main draw stage of the Miami Open as a wild card ranked 140th in the world, and almost nobody outside the Filipino tennis community gave her a serious shot at making noise in the draw. Her first match was against American Katie Volonets, a solid player, nothing spectacular, and Eala handled it without drama. Fine, one win, wild cards get one win. Sometimes, that's not a story. Then she beat Yelena Ostapenko, a former French Open champion, someone who can dismantle any player on the planet on a good day. And Eala didn't just scrape past her, she won 7-6, 7-5, and looked completely composed doing it. That's when a few more people started paying attention. Next up was Madison Keys, another Grand Slam champion, Australian Open winner, one of the biggest hitters on the WTA tour. Eala took her apart 6-4, 6-2. At this point, the Filipino fanbase wasn't just watching anymore, they were showing up, physically. In numbers, the venue wasn't built to accommodate. People were standing outside the arena watching through whatever gap they could find because the courts Eala was assigned to simply weren't big enough for the crowd she was pulling. Then came Iga Swiatek in the quarterfinals. At the time, Swiatek was ranked third in the world, a five-time Grand Slam champion who had spent the better part of 3 years at the very top of the sport. Eala beat her 6-2, 7-5. She became the first wild card in WTA history to beat 3 Grand Slam champions in the same tournament. She became the first Filipina ever to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. She was 19 years old. Her run ended in the semis against Jessica Pegula, but by that point the damage, in the best possible sense, was already done. She walked out of Miami in 2025 with 390 ranking points, a career-high ranking, and a story that the entire tennis world had no choice but to acknowledge, from 140th to inside the top 100 in a single fortnight. And that's the foundation everything else is sitting on right now. Fast forward 12 months and the landscape looks completely different for her. Eala enters the 2026 Miami Open, ranked world number 29, a career high she reached on March the 16th, just 3 days before today's match. She got there by putting together one of the most consistent stretches of tennis any young player has managed in recent memory. Quarterfinals in Abu Dhabi, quarterfinals in Dubai, where she beat world number 7 Jasmine Paolini, a round of 16 finish at Indian Wells, where she took out Coco Gauff before Gauff retired injured, wins over Diana Yastremska and Sorana Cirstea scattered through the season. She has beaten top 10 players 4 times in her career so far, and the losses on her record this year have mostly come against players ranked inside the top 30. The point is, this isn't a one-tournament wonder. The ranking is legitimate. The seeding at Miami is earned. Nobody handed her world number 29 as a courtesy. But here's where the center court conversation starts getting complicated. James Blake didn't put Eala on center court because she's seeded 31st. If ranking alone drove the scheduling decision, there are players seated above her who would logically get priority billing in the early rounds. Blake said it plainly. The international interest in Eala is too high to put her anywhere else. The Filipino fan base proved in 2025 that they will show up in numbers that smaller courts cannot handle, and Blake admitted on Tennis Channel that he learned that lesson the hard way with Juan Fonseca last year when Brazilian fans turned up in numbers that overwhelmed the grandstand court. He wasn't making that mistake again, so the decision to put Eala on center court is a crowd management call dressed up as a scheduling one. And that distinction matters, because it means the WTA and the tournament are essentially saying that a player's fan base size, not just their performance level or their seeding, is a legitimate factor in deciding who gets the biggest stage. That is a genuinely interesting question for women's tennis, and it's not an unfair one to ask, which brings us to Billie Jean King. Now, and this is the part that requires some real precision, what Billie Jean King actually represents in this conversation is far more layered than a simple eruption over a scheduling decision. The framing you've seen floating around, the one that suggests she's out here publicly attacking the WTA for glorifying Alex Eala, needs to be looked at carefully. Because King is not someone who operates without reason, and her history with both the WTA and with young players like Eala tells a very specific story. King founded the WTA in 1973. She did it because women's tennis at the time had no real professional structure, no equal prize money, no guarantee that talent alone would be enough to build a career on. She fought, genuinely fought, not metaphorically, to make sure that the tour would be built on merit, on results, on the idea that what you do on the court is what determines how you're treated off it. That standard, merit above everything else, is the philosophical backbone of everything King built. And when you hold that standard up against a situation where a player is being handed center court billing, based partly on how many people follow her on social media and how large her national fan base is, you can see where the tension lives. It's not personal, it's structural. Here's what actually happened between King and Eala before any of this Miami noise started. Back in 2024, when Eala was still ranked 148th in the world and hadn't yet broken into a Grand Slam main draw as a professional, King hosted her personally at the annual Billie Jean King Power Hour, a WTA player development mentoring session. King's team wrote to Eala directly and told her they looked forward to seeing her achieve her full potential. That's not the action of someone who has a problem with this player. That's someone who saw something in a kid who hadn't yet become a headline. So the narrative that King is somehow opposed to Alex Eala as a person or as a player doesn't hold up against the actual record. What's more accurate is that the questions being asked around Eala's center court placement touch on something King has always cared about deeply, whether the WTA is making decisions based on the right criteria. And that question has real weight right now, because Eala is walking into this tournament carrying enormous pressure that most of the noise around her completely ignores. Those 390 points she earned from last year's semifinal run, they expire at the end of this tournament. That's how the WTA's 52-week rolling ranking system works. Points don't carry forward indefinitely, they drop off exactly 1 year after you earn them. So if Eala loses her opening match against Siegemund today, she doesn't just fail to add new points. She loses 380 of the ones she currently has and potentially drops out of the top 50 entirely. A player the tournament just put on center court could realistically be outside the seeded range at the next major event, depending on what happens over the next 2 weeks. That's the actual story sitting underneath all the scheduling. Drama, she has to back it up. On the same courts, against a draw that includes a potential rematch with Swiatek in the third round, Karolina Muchova or Clara Tauson in the fourth, and Victoria Mboko or Mira Andreeva potentially waiting in the quarterfinals. The path to defending her points is brutal, and the opponents who've had a full year of film on her game aren't going to be surprised by the same tricks that worked in 2025. Her serve has developed better placement and variation this season. Her rally tolerance in extended cross-court exchanges has improved. She's been more selective about when she goes for winners rather than forcing the issue. ESPN noted ahead of this tournament that it's a more complete version of the aggressive baseline game that carried her through Miami last year. but the margins at this level are thin enough that growth alone doesn't guarantee results. Siegemund, for her part, is no easy opener. The 38-year-old German reached the Wimbledon quarterfinals last year before losing to world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka. She's a 3-time Grand Slam doubles champion, a former world number 27 in singles, and someone who has absolutely nothing to lose, walking onto that center court today against a player carrying the weight of an entire nation's expectations. So here's the full picture, and it's messier and more interesting than any rage-fueled headline gives it credit for. The WTA and James Blake made a calculated business decision to put Alex Eala on center court at the Miami Open, based on crowd demand. That decision is already being framed in certain corners as the tour glorifying a young star beyond what her current standing strictly warrants. Billie Jean King's name has been pulled into that conversation because she represents the original standard the WTA was built on, and that standard has always been about merit first. Whether King is actively and personally erupting over this specific call, or whether her legacy is simply being used as the philosophical counterweight to the argument for Eala, is a distinction worth making. What's undeniable is that Alex Eala earned the right to be in this building. She earned her ranking, she earned her seed. The center court call is where the debate lives, and it's a debate worth having because it gets at something fundamental about how the WTA decides who gets chosen to dominate the biggest stages and what the criteria for that should actually be. The court doesn't care about any of it, though. Today, it's just Eala and Siegemund. And what happens on that center court over the next 2 weeks will do more to settle this conversation than any headline ever could. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of tennis fan this channel exists for. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We break down the stories behind the stories every single time something worth talking about happens on tour. Drop your take on the center court decision in the comments below. Should fanbase size factor into scheduling, or should it be rankings only? This one's worth the debate.